Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the new students, incoming first-year students, transfer students joining us at Lewis and Clark. Welcome to the dozens of facilitators who have volunteered to lead us in discussions following the webinar. Welcome to the incredible NSO leaders who make the NSO experience possible. And welcome to Jamila Osman, who has shared her essay with us, A Map of Lost Things on Family, Grief, and the Meaning of Home. She'll be speaking with us shortly. Before I introduce her, I wanted to thank Jenny Bornstein from Watsek Library and Francesca Spahn, the director of NSO, and Alan Michel Gaciola, who works with Francesca in NSO, and also Henry Van Buren, who's helping us with AV, from AV and events today. I also want to thank Robin Holmes Sullivan, who's the Vice President of Student Life and the Dean of Students, for her dedication to the well-being of you all, for Lewis and Clark students, and for her really extraordinary stewardship over our campus this summer and this fall as we're facing all sorts of unusual challenges. My name is Mo Healy, and I'm the chair of the History Department, and I serve on something called the First Year Experience Committee. And that committee was responsible for choosing the common reading, which is Jamila's essay. You'll all begin classes next week, and this semester your professors will be assigning you a bounty of texts from every discipline at the college. But we see value as you transition to this new community in spending some time at the very beginning, just a little bit of time this afternoon with a common reading, something that we all read together and talk about at the same time. And so as we were considering the texts, we were specifically looking for a reading that discussed place and space, belonging and home, and other explorations of self and people in transition. And this brought us to Jamila Osman's A Map of Lost Things. And we loved the essay for its rich themes, its beautiful language, and also that it has this connection to Portland. So I'll introduce our author. Jamila Osman is a Somali writer, educator, and organizer from Portland, Oregon. She worked as a high school teacher in the Beaverton School District. Beaverton, for those who don't know this area yet, is a city to the west of Portland. So she worked in Beaverton for several years, and she says that she's forever indebted to the hundreds of young people who taught her more than she ever taught them, she says, as their teacher. She's currently a student at the University of Iowa's nonfiction writing program, where she's teaching creative writing. And she has received writing fellowships from Caldera, Gerasi, and the MacDowell Colony. She's the winner of the 2019 Brunel International African Poetry Prize. And also that same year, last year, 2019, she's the winner of the Adirondack Review's 46er Prize for Poetry. Some of her writing can be found in the New York Times, in Al Jazeera, Teen Vogue, Pacific Standard, and in other places. Finally, her first poetry collection, entitled A Girl is a Sovereign State, was just published by the Akashic Press as part of their New Generation African Poets Chapbook box set. So with that, Jamila, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Mo, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much to everyone who had a hand in putting this together. And thank you so much to all the students and the facilitators who engaged with my work with time and attention and care. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you. You know, in an alternate universe, we're all in the same place and the room is buzzing the way that a room does when it's full of people moving and breathing at the same time. And I want to spend some time today talking about alternate universes, but I'll get to that eventually. I want to start by acknowledging that this is a time of very deep grief for so many of us, a time of unyielding uncertainty. So many of us move through the days holding our breath, wondering what world we might wake up to. The other day, my friend Jasmine said that each hour holds within itself an entire life cycle of intoxicating promise or unbearable grief. And I felt that. And I think that a lot of you might feel that too. Grief is usually such a private ritual in this culture, and yet here we are experiencing it at the same time. So many people that I know didn't even know that what they were feeling and experiencing was grief. They only knew that there was a void that no fact or reason could fill. Death is normally so abstract and so invisible to most of us, especially in this culture. We even try to obscure the reality of it with language. We have so many ways to say that someone has died without ever saying that someone has died. A number of scholars refer to the United States as a death-denying culture. There's only so long that you can deny the reality of something. And in this moment, we're being confronted by the truth of what so many people have attempted to deny for so long. And it's taken a global pandemic with an unbearably high death toll, a litany of Black death, a rebellion in the colony, for so many people to finally grapple with the truth of what America is, the truth of what it has always been. And I think that at one point, I might, like if this was 2017 when I wrote the essay, if this was 2018, if this was 2019, I might have wanted to give a lecture about hope. But I worry now about the danger of peddling hope in times like these, especially hope without clarity, especially hope without direction and a call to action. So when I was growing up, one of my favorite story collections was this Random House book of fairy tales. It was the most beautiful book that I owned. The cover was absolutely gorgeous. It was celestial blue and white, and it was as magical to me as the stories that it contained. So before I knew how to read, my mother and I would get under the covers each night and read a fairy tale before bed. Her voice narrating the story, my head resting against her shoulder, eyes roving the page, waiting for the moment that the disparate letters and sounds would assemble themselves into words. And soon enough, the letters had meaning and weight. And finally, it was I who told the stories and she who listened. And so our favorite tale was The Emperor's New Clothes. We laughed at the emperor's vanity, the brutality of his self-importance. We laughed at the absurdity of his subjects who would deny what they saw with their own eyes, deny the truth of their very bodies. We laughed, certain that fairy tales were for children like me, that all the lessons to be gleaned from them had already been picked clean from the bone. We laughed, safe under our blankets, certain that the story had nothing to teach us. When I wrote a map of lost things in 2017, I had a very different relationship to language. I had more faith in language. I believed that language could save us. I believed that the right words in the right order could restore beauty in a world that often felt devoid of it. And I'm not so innocent anymore. I know the limitations of language, how meaningless words are when someone is hungry. I don't know how many of you have been able to participate in the nightly protests in Portland or in any of the cities that you're coming from, but a popular refrain of the movement is say his name, say her name. And I can scream Breonna Taylor's name until I am blue in the face, but there are no words to bring the dead back to life. So to love language has meant that I've had to confront all the ways that it fails us, to confront that perhaps there are not yet words for all the things that we are feeling, all the ways that we move through the world, and all the things that we want. When my sister died, I felt all the words in me evaporate, leave me an emptied well. What language could I use to bridge the silo between life and death? Was it the Somali of my mother's country and first loss? Was it the Arabic of the God that we hoped would answer our prayers? Or was it English, the language in which my sister and I kept each other's secrets? I think sometimes we expect entirely too much of language. Or maybe I'm just projecting. Maybe that's something that I do. We want it to save us. We want it to be a country no one can bar us from entering. We want it to be a home where we will never feel unwelcome. So I was actually born the same year that my parents lost their country. And even as I say that, I know that loss is a poor choice of words. Their country was not a pair of glasses on the bedside table that they fumbled around for in the dark. Their country did not disappear off the face of the earth. It did not suddenly vanish from all the world's maps. Although its depiction on those maps is not quite honest. All maps lie. And this is a central concern in my essay that you all read. I first learned that lesson when I was in elementary school, when my friend Sara told the teacher that she was Palestinian. And unable to locate Palestine on a map, the teacher insisted that Palestine didn't exist, and poof, right? Just like that, Sarah was disappeared. So in an effort to be more precise with language, it was not my parents' country that was lost, but their belief that there was a place where they belonged. And that's the greatest casualty of being displaced, losing the innocence of believing in something as simple as home. To be in exile is to suffer the knowledge of who you once were and who you inevitably became. It's to be haunted by ghosts who speak in all the voices of all the people you might have become. And so I think in a lot of ways that we're all feeling slightly exiled in this moment. Exiled from a world we thought we knew, exiled from the dreams that we relied on to carry us through the day. We had so many plans, all of us, and now we cannot even count on the ground beneath our feet. So I say that my parents lost their country, and then I immediately rescind the sentence. In my own writing, I'm obsessed with the physics of language, the mass of certain words, what they mean. And the word lost has no momentum. It's imprecise. How can one word hold the accumulation of my parents' grief, of mine? How can any word? There's a line from a Solmaz Sharif poem that I love and return to often. She writes, "According to most definitions, I've never been at war. According to mine, most of my life spent there." And all of us, whether we want to or not, can relate to this. We are living in a season of forever wars. And I didn't know what war was until I was 11 and watched the US drop the first bomb of the Iraq War. I was sitting in the playroom, the room with the bright red futon and the plastic bins where my siblings and I kept our board games and toys. This was the room where we ate popcorn, where we picked kernels from between our teeth. This was the room where we watched the movies that we rented for 99 cents from Blockbuster when Blockbuster was still a thing. And I was in the room alone at this moment, surrounded by library books that I had checked out from school that day, and the mess that my brother had made earlier that morning with his plastic Legos. And I was frozen, transfixed by what I saw on the screen. The bombs looked like fireworks, but only for a moment. An explosion of light that did not fade into the sky, but grew monstrous and garish in the dark. Orange bursts of flame, 100 suns rising and setting too close to the ground. Later, I learned that lots of my classmates and their parents thought that Baghdad was a well-deserved revenge for what happened on September 11th. What were we supposed to do? My neighbor Joseph asked on the bus home from school. We had to show them who was boss. His giddiness scared me, even though I didn't know what exactly I was afraid of. Joseph's father was a mailman, and his mother gave me chocolate chip cookies whenever I went over to jump on the trampoline with him and his little sister Moira. Years and years later, I learned that after high school, Joseph had joined the military. Whenever we're back home in Portland at the same time, which isn't very often, we don't speak. I occasionally find myself in my car behind his on Bethany Boulevard, the street that leads out of our neighborhood. There's a white bumper sticker on the left-hand corner of his back windshield. If you can't stand behind our troops, feel free to stand in front of them. It grows smaller as the distance between us increases. I remember that a year after that, explicit details of the abuses against detainees at Abu Ghraib began to emerge. And I'm going to connect all of this back to my essay, I promise. Photographs of nude men with plastic bags over their heads or dogs between their legs saturated the media. There were American soldiers laughing in the background of many of these photos. They looked young. Their smiles hurt my stomach. I can't watch this, my father would say, whenever the news anchors would begin to detail the things that had been done to these prisoners. He'd aim the remote control at the television and change the channel or turn it off completely. They hate our freedom, George Bush declared at the start of that war. Either you are with us or you're with the terrorists. And so George Bush was a lot of things, but I don't think we talk often enough, or I don't think we talk enough about how in that moment he was a poet. Because look at what he was able to do with language. Look at how he violently deployed terms like democracy and freedom and terrorism to justify what could otherwise not be justified. And this isn't to call out him, this isn't a call out that's specific to him or his political party. I don't know what anyone's political affiliations are in the room. And in all honesty, it doesn't matter to me because I've learned to see through that ultimate form of theater. And so consider this my pledge of no allegiance to no nation, no president, no political party. One of my friends, Safia Ahilu, has a poem that I love called Self-Portrait with No Flag. And in it she writes, I come from 2 failed countries and I give them back. I pledge no allegiance to no land. I pledge allegiance to no border cut by force to draw blood. I pledge allegiance to no government, no collection of white men carving up the map with their pens. And so I think often of what we are asked to pledge allegiance to in order to live in this country, and who and what that allegiance means we must disavow. And so I've been sitting in these negotiations for a while, but have revisited them now that we must make choices unlike any that we've ever made before. And I know that I'm a poet and I'm drawn to theatrics, but I say that with absolutely no hyperbole. We have to make, each of us, choices that we can live with. Every one of us is going to be somebody's ancestor someday. And so shortly after September 11th, a brick was thrown through the back window of my uncle's Toyota Camry, which is, you know, the car of choice for immigrants all over the US for some reason. And so he gets it fixed, insists that it's a random act of suburban NUI. And we believe him. We choose to believe him because the alternative is not to believe him. And what would that say about the place that we lived? When it happens again, he orders a fleet of patriotic bumper stickers online. Some are emblazoned with images of the American flag, others with pictures of bald eagles, and they say things like, support our troops and God bless America. The sticker that he places directly in the center of the rear window says, never forget 9/11, the 11 etched in the shape of the Twin Towers. A few years ago, on our way to a bridal shower, a friend and I were accosted by an angry man in a nearly empty parking garage. He was drunk. It was early spring, evening still too nippy to be entirely comfortable. He stood so close to me that I could feel his breath on my face. And it's important to note that my friend Alat was wearing a hijab. Dirty bitches, he screamed in our faces. You terrorists, I should kill you. I should kill you right now. Alat stood there in a black wrap dress, shaking from a combination of cold and fear. Her red lipstick was startling against her pale face. We all looked so eerie in the yellow fluorescent lighting. We made it to the bridal shower with a story to tell. We laughed about what had happened. We laughed at the exhilaration of our escape. We were, this time, like all the times before, the ones who got away. We were lucky that night. But luck is not enough to survive in America. So I think, often about how we can all survive in America. America's the greatest lie ever told. Years ago, doing humanitarian work on the US-Mexico border, I was startled, and I shouldn't have been, but I was startled to realize that the border cut right through the Tohono O'odham Nation. And so a sovereign people were and still are unable to move freely on their own land without being accosted by the border patrol stations and checkpoints that surround them. Separating tribal members that live on the US side of the border from tribal members that live on the Mexico side of the border. The Tohono O'odham Nation is older than this country. In the beginning of the emperor's new clothes, the emperor sends an old minister to check on the progress of some robes that he's having commissioned. The weavers are master con artists. They promise that the robes will be the most magnificent garments ever made and invisible to anyone who is unfit for their job or unusually stupid. Don't hesitate to tell us what you think, says one of the weavers as he gestures towards the empty loom. The old minister obviously can't see anything. There's nothing there to see. It's beautiful, he lies. It's enchanting. The Pledge of Allegiance was written as a marketing campaign to get flags into public schools. And I don't know how many of you know this. This was a surprise to me. And I'm still not 100% sure how this relates to any of the points that I'm trying to make, but it feels important to include. Between 1969 and 1972, 6 American flags were planted on the moon. There's an iconic image of Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin clad in a spacesuit standing next to the American flag, its colors vibrant against the inscrutable darkness of space. In a conversation between Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, the first 2 humans to land on the moon, Neil Armstrong says, "Magnificent sight out here," to which Aldrin responds, "Magnificent desolation." Most of the flags that have been planted on the moon have disintegrated, but of those that remain, their colors have been bleached by time and sunlight. I think and write about borders all of the time, not just the ones that arbitrarily delineate where one country ends and where the other begins, but also all of the ones that exist between us. And this has felt especially important to revisit recently. And so this is a country obsessed with our separateness. Individualism is such a deeply rooted cultural ethos that we don't often reckon with all the ways that it makes life untenable. I know that we need each other. I know that we're not meant to live and dream alone. We need community to survive. And I'm talking about community as a verb, as a thing we do together, actively, regularly, deliberately. Being in the same room as a group of people does not make them a community. Being on the same college campus doesn't guarantee community either. And I urge you to challenge anyone who tells you otherwise. Solidarity has to be the core tenet of every community. And it's no easy feat to unlearn all the ways that we've been taught that we're better off alone. Gwendolyn Brooks says that we are each other's business. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's magnitude and bond. I think about that all the time. We are each other's business. And that means that we have to be honest about all the ways that power function in our communities and on college campuses and in our classrooms. And those of us who have power in any form, because we have to finally start talking about power and not privilege, right? And so those of us that have power in any form, whether it comes from whiteness, whether it lies in our class position, whether it lies in our gender identity, whether it lies in our immigration status, we have to be willing to cede that or continue to hoard it, but to know that it is at the expense of our own humanity, and it is at the expense of a chance to truly be in community with other people. We know that the state maintains its borders through force, through violence, through domination. I'm interested in resisting all the ways that we reproduce that domination in our living and our loving and our learning. What are the ways that we maintain all of the borders that exist between us? There are so many of them that we have to cross. We have to interrogate the allegiances that we've been asked to make all of our lives. That interrogation is fraught, and it is terrifying, and it is not without risk. But there are people who have been going toe to toe with the myth of America longer than we have been alive. Enslaved Africans believed in a world where they were free, even though slavery was the most powerful institution at the time. And that is the power of radical imagination. They believed in an alternate universe, and ashe, so it became. At the end of the emperor's new clothes, the emperor struts down the crowded streets of his city, showing off his new outfit. A pair of noblemen walk behind him, holding the train of his long coat. There's nothing in their hands but air. The townspeople applaud the beauty of his clothing, croon over the dazzling colors. They're too afraid or embarrassed to admit they cannot see anything. They're pretenders, hoping that the audacity of their imagination will make up for their disappointments. Truth is always the first casualty of power. Lone naysayer, in the midst of an enchanted crowd, a child shouts, "But he hasn't got anything on." And like that, the spell is broken. Truth is that child's voice, a moth spinning towards the light that shines outside the kingdom walls. At the end of a map of lost things, I realized that there is no map that can hold all of the histories that inform my life. Because what is a life but an accumulation of histories? And I consider that essay, like I said before, my pledge of no allegiance to this empire or any iteration of it. Instead, I pledge allegiance to the memory of my sister, to Jacob Blake's healing, to the families of Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin. I pledge allegiance to Breonna Taylor. I pledge allegiance to Marsha P. Johnson. I pledge allegiance to the Portland protesters, to my mother, to my ancestors, to my progeny. I pledge allegiance to everything on the other side of the border that we have been convinced will keep us safe. I pledge allegiance to beauty, to justice, to language, to all of the words that we do not yet have. I pledge allegiance to what cannot be mapped. I pledge allegiance to the countryless, the paperless, the exiled, the working class. I pledge allegiance to us and every single one of our dreams. I pledge allegiance to a world that we can all inhabit, a world that we inch towards step by precious step, day by precious day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamila. Thank you for your words, for your language, the beautiful sound of your voice. Before we make a move, I want to just hold a moment of silence together. We're 423 people sitting where we're sitting. Let's just take a moment to, you can close your eyes if you want to, just to think and be here before we move on. Okay, let's come back together. We're going to be, I'll give you a little roadmap. Speaking of maps, a little roadmap for where we go from here with our event. We'll be leaving the webinar and you'll be moving to your small discussion groups over Zoom. So here are the instructions, and Jenny and Francesca and Alan chime in if I'm misstating things. So you're going to hang up on the webinar call, and then the facilitators are going to activate the Zoom links for your discussion section. And the students and the NSO leaders, you should have received these links, your Zoom links ahead of time. So go ahead and you'll log into that. For a few lucky discussion groups, Jamila is going to be popping in to join you. I'm sorry that, that we can't have Jamila visit all the groups, but we must let her eat dinner at some point later tonight. So those sections who will be visited by Jamila, you know who you are in advance. So there won't be surprises. So your discussion can run until 4:30 or 5, as whatever you see, however you see fit in your group. And if your discussion is roaring, we'll just ask the NSO leaders and the facilitators to communicate about when you want to wrap up, and dinner does follow the event. Francesca, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, actually, the links that everyone can find the breakout sessions to was just popped into the chat box by Jenny. So everyone should open up that link to the Google spreadsheet, and then you will be able to see everyone's NSO group and group leader. And then if you look to the right, there is all of the breakout Zoom links.
Okay, if you run into trouble and you end up either shut out of a group or you can't find where you're supposed to be, just log back into the webinar and the team here will help you find your way. So I just want to wrap up with a heartfelt thanks to Jamila Osman for sharing her written text and also her words today. And thank you all for coming together to read and to think and reflect about her work on this lovely afternoon. So take care. Bye-bye.